Welcome back to my series of video adaptations of the online textbook, Open Music Theory. For those of you who are just joining us, you can find Part 1 on my channel's Open Music Theory playlist. Open Music Theory was published under a Creative Commons Share-alike license, so this video is also published under the same license. Links are included to the original Open Music Theory textbook in the description. This lesson repeats a lot of the information from Lesson 2 regarding clefs and ledger lines. However, they are very important concepts, and thus the information bears repeating. But I think you can skip this lesson after the discussion of the musical alphabet if you already have a good grasp on the subject matter. All that being said, let's begin. Lesson 3, Reading Clefs. The musical alphabet. In Western musical notation, pitches are designated by the first 7 letters of the Latin alphabet. That's A, B, C, D, E, F, and G. After G, these letter names repeat in a loop. A, B, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, etc. This loop of letter names exists because musicians and music theorists today accept what is called octave equivalence, or the assumption that pitches separated by an octave should have the same letter name. Octave equivalence assumes that two pitches separated by an octave, 12 half steps apart, are musically equivalent. Which is a little confusing though, right? I mean, the word octave means eighth in Latin, not 12th. Well, think of it this way. Let's say we have C4 through C5, which is indeed 8 whole notes. But we need C5 to be the lowest note in the next octave, so we can't include it in this one, so we're left with 7. Now if I play through this range of notes and include the half steps in between, you'll find that there are indeed 12 half steps. What matters is that if we accept octave equivalence, then the middle C, C4, is musically equivalent to C5 even though they are different pitches. And if I play them back to back, they sound similar. Even though they are obviously different pitches. Which is strange because if I play C4 and D4, they sound less similar even though they are closer on the keyboard. It becomes much more apparent if I play C4 and C5 together, and then play C4 and D4 together. The latter sounds very different, right? And there's a physical reason for this, which we can find on an attached resource from Lesson 2. If you're not checking out those resources, you really should. Remember how pitches are sound waves? Different pitches are different because they have different wavelengths. The distance between peaks in the wave. Lower pitches have longer wavelengths, higher pitches have shorter wavelengths. We can also measure this as a frequency, the amount of times the sound wave peaks within a second. So a sound wave that peaks 100 times in a second has a frequency of 100 hertz, hertz being the unit we use to measure peaks per second. C4 has a frequency of 261.63 hertz. C5 has a frequency of 523.25 Hz. If you do the math, you'll find that the frequency of C5 is almost exactly twice that of C4. And for whatever reason, this 2-to-1 ratio is quite pleasing and makes the two sound similar to us. Perhaps because the two waves regularly peak together. There are other intervals, like the third, a 5-to-4 ratio, the fourth, and the fifth, but we'll talk about those another time. This assumption, octave equivalence, varies with the milieu. For example, some ancient Greek music theorists did not accept octave equivalence. These theorists used more than 7 letters of the Greek alphabet to name pitches. Clefs and ranges. The notation of notes, clefs, and ledger lines chapter introduced 4 clefs: treble, bass, alto, and tenor. A clef indicates which pitches are assigned to the lines and spaces on a staff. The treble clef is typically used for higher voices and instruments such as a flute, violin, trumpet, or soprano voice. The bass clef is usually utilized for lower voices and instruments such as a bassoon, cello, trombone, or bass voice. The alto clef is primarily used for the viola, a mid-ranged instrument, while the tenor clef is sometimes employed in cello, bassoon, and trombone music, although the principal clef used for these instruments is still the bass clef. Each clef indicates how the lines and spaces of the staff correspond to pitch. Memorizing the patterns for each clef will help you read music written for different voices and instruments. The treble clef, also known as the G clef, is one of the most commonly used clefs today. This example shows the letter names used for the lines on a staff when a treble clef is employed. One mnemonic device that may help you remember this order of letter names is "Every good bird does fly," E-G-B-D-F. A mnemonic device, by the way, is a technique used to aid memorization and is ironically a hard to remember word. As you can see, the treble clef wraps around the G line, the second line from the bottom. That's why we call it the G clef. This example shows the letter names used for the spaces of a staff with a treble clef. Remembering that these letter names spell the word face may make identifying these spaces easier. If you're ever in trouble, don't panic, and remember that even if you only know the lines or only the spaces, you can use your knowledge of the musical alphabet to fill in the gaps. Even if you only knew one note on the scale, you could fill out the whole thing. Reading bass clef. The other most commonly used clef today is the bass clef, also known as the F clef. This example shows the letter names used for the lines of a staff when a bass clef is employed. A mnemonic device for this order of letter names is "Good bikes don't fall apart," G-B-D-F-A. The bass clef is sometimes called the F clef. As you can see, the dot of the bass clef begins on the F line, the second line from the top. This example shows the letter names used for the spaces of a staff with a bass clef. The mnemonic device "All cows eat grass," A-C-E-G, may make identifying these spaces easier. Reading alto clef. This example shows the letter names used for the lines of the staff with the alto clef, which is less commonly used. The mnemonic device "Fat alley cats eat garbage," F-A-C-E-G, may help you remember this order of letter names. As seen in this example, the center of the alto clef is indented around the C line, the middle line. For this reason, it is sometimes called a C clef. This example shows the letter names used for the spaces of a staff with an alto clef, which could be remembered with the mnemonic device "Grand boats drift flamboyantly," G-B-D-F. Reading tenor clef. The tenor clef, another less commonly used clef, is also sometimes called a C clef, but the center of the clef is indented around the second line from the top. This example shows the letter names used for the lines of a staff when a tenor clef is employed, which can be remembered with the mnemonic device "Dodges, Fords, and Chevrolets everywhere," D-F-A-C-E. Example 8 shows the letter names used for the spaces of a staff with a tenor clef. The mnemonic device "Elvis's guitar broke down," E-G-B-D, may make identifying these spaces easier. Ledger lines. When notes are too high or too low to be written on a staff, small lines are drawn to extend the staff. You may recall from the previous chapter that these extra lines are called ledger lines. Ledger lines can be used to extend a staff with any clef. This example shows ledger lines above a staff with a treble clef. Note that each space and line above the staff gets a letter name with ledger lines, as if the staff were simply continuing upwards. The same is true for ledger lines below a staff, as shown in this example. Notice that each space and line below the staff gets a letter name with ledger lines, as if the staff were simply continuing downwards. This concludes Lesson 3. In this lesson, we covered many important concepts. Here's the most important stuff to remember. Pitches, discrete tones with individual frequencies in Western musical notation, are designated by the letters A, B, C, D, E, F, and G, which repeat in a loop. Different clefs make reading different ranges, spans of notes a voice or instrument can play, easier. Each clef indicates how the lines and spaces of the staff correspond to pitch. The tail end of this lesson links to a bunch of great resources, including printable flashcards and online quizzes to really help drill in your knowledge. So click on the link to the original lesson in the description and go check those out. In Lesson 4, we will discuss the keyboard and the grand staff.